The autumn rain drummed against the windows of the small bookshop in Hongdae, creating a rhythmic melody that seemed to echo the chaos in Lee Min-jun's heart. He stood frozen in the doorway, his designer umbrella dripping onto the worn wooden floor, as he watched the most beautiful woman he had ever seen carefully arrange books on a high shelf. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to exist. Min-jun had come to this obscure little bookshop with one purpose: to find the perfect first edition novel for his fiancée, Park So-young. Tomorrow marked their one-year engagement anniversary, and So-young had mentioned wanting to add rare books to her collection. As the heir to Hansung Group, Min-jun was accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted, when he wanted it. But what he wanted now was something he had never prepared for. The woman on the ladder turned slightly, and Min-jun caught a glimpse of her profile. She had the same delicate features as So-young, the same elegant neck, but there was something softer about her, something that made his breath catch in his throat. When she smiled at something she was reading, her entire face lit up with genuine joy, so different from So-young's carefully practiced expressions. "Excuse me," Min-jun found himself saying, his voice rougher than intended. "I'm looking for something special." The woman turned fully, and Min-jun felt the world tilt on its axis. Her eyes were warm and curious, not calculating like those of the women in his social circle. She was beautiful, yes, but it was an understated beauty that didn't announce itself with expensive makeup and designer clothes. "What kind of special?" she asked, climbing down the ladder with graceful movements. "We have first editions, signed copies, or perhaps you're looking for something with sentimental value." Min-jun's mind went blank. He had rehearsed what he would say to the bookshop owner, had prepared his usual commanding tone that left no room for negotiation. But facing this woman, he felt like a teenager again, awkward and uncertain. "A novel?" he managed. "Something romantic, but not obvious." She smiled, and Min-jun felt something crack open in his chest. "Ah, you want something that says, 'I understand you,' rather than, 'I'm trying to impress you. Follow me.'" As she led him deeper into the bookshop, Min-jun couldn't help but notice how she moved between the narrow aisles like she belonged there, how her fingers trailed lovingly over book spines, how she paused to straighten a display here and there. This place was clearly her sanctuary. "Are you the owner?" he asked, immediately regretting the question when she laughed, a sound like silver bells that made him want to hear it again and again. "Me? Oh no, I just work here part-time. I'm actually a graduate student at Seoul National University, studying Korean literature. The owner, Mr. Kim, lets me help customers because I know the inventory by heart." She pulled a slim volume from a high shelf. "This might be perfect. It's a 1967 first edition of The Unforgotten Things by Kim Young, huh? It's about a man who realizes that the love he thought he wanted isn't the love he actually needs." The irony wasn't lost on Min-jun. He took the book, his fingers brushing hers for just a moment. The contact sent electricity through his entire body, and from the way her eyes widened slightly, he knew she felt it too. "It sounds perfect," he said, though he was no longer thinking about So-young at all. "Your girlfriend has excellent taste if she appreciates subtle romance," the woman said, wrapping the book carefully in tissue paper. "Fiancé," Min-jun corrected automatically, then immediately wished he hadn't. Something flickered across her face. Disappointment? Relief? He couldn't tell. "Congratulations," she said softly, but her smile didn't reach her eyes anymore. "She's very lucky." Min-jun wanted to tell her that he was the one who should feel lucky, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he paid for the book, their transaction conducted in a silence that felt heavy with unspoken possibilities. "I'm Min-jun," he said as she handed him the wrapped book. "Lee Min-jun." "I'm So-jin," she replied. "Park So-jin." The world stopped. Park So-jin. So-young's younger sister. The sister she had mentioned exactly twice in the year they had been engaged, once to say she existed, and once to say she was different from the rest of the family. Min-jun now understood what So-young had meant and why she had never introduced them. "Park," he repeated slowly. "As in Park So-young?" So-jin's face went pale. You're So Young's fiancé, Lee Min-jun from Hansung Group. It wasn't a question. Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed quickly by something that looked like horror. You're her sister, Min-jun said, still trying to process this impossible coincidence. I have to. So, Jin stepped backward, bumping into a display of poetry. Books. I should get back to work. But Min-jun couldn't let her go, not when he had just found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. So, Jin, wait. Please don't, she whispered, and there was pain in her voice that cut through him like a blade. Just, please don't. She disappeared into the back room of the bookshop, leaving Min-jun standing alone among the books, the wrapped novel feeling like a weight in his hands. He should leave. He should go home to his penthouse apartment, give So Young her gift tomorrow, and forget this encounter ever happened. Instead, he found himself returning to the bookshop the next day. Sojin wasn't there. According to Mr. Kim, she had called in sick. Min-jun bought another book, one he didn't need, and left his business card with a message. I'd like to discuss Korean literature with someone who truly understands it. It was a thin excuse, and they both knew it. But when Sojin called him 3 days later, her voice was carefully neutral. Mr. Kim said you were interested in discussing literature, among other things. Min-jun replied, his heart racing just from hearing her voice. I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? We're both adults. We can have a conversation about books. There was a long pause. Because you're engaged to my sister, and because I already know this isn't really about books. Her honesty took his breath away. In his world, people rarely said what they actually meant. Everything was subtext and strategy, manipulation dressed up as politeness. But Sojin had just laid the truth bare between them. You're right, he admitted. It's not about books. I can't stop thinking about you. Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. We can't do this. We're not doing anything. We're just talking. Min-jun. The way she said his name, soft and uncertain, made his chest tighten. You don't understand. So Young is. She's everything I'm not. She's sophisticated and beautiful and perfect for someone like you. You're just what? I'm just me. I work in a bookshop and live in a tiny apartment and spend my weekends reading instead of going to charity galas. We don't even live in the same world. Min-jun closed his eyes, leaning back in his office chair as Seoul spread out below him through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She was right about their worlds being different, but she was wrong about everything else. What if I don't want perfect? He asked. What if I want real? The line went quiet for so long that Min-jun thought she had hung up. Finally, she spoke, and her voice was thick with tears she was trying not to shed. It doesn't matter what you want. It doesn't matter what I want. Some things are just impossible. She did hang up then, leaving Min-jun staring at his phone and wondering how his carefully ordered life had become so complicated in the span of a few days. That evening, he had dinner with So Young at her favorite restaurant in Gangnam. She was radiant in a way that would have taken his breath away just a week ago, dressed in a designer gown that probably cost more than most people made in a month. She thanked him effusively for the book, though he could tell she hadn't actually read any of it yet. Darling, she said over dessert, her manicured fingers playing with the stem of her wineglass. I've been thinking about our wedding. I know we said spring, but what if we moved it up? Winter weddings can be so elegant, and the Grand Hyatt has a cancellation for December. Jun's fork paused halfway to his mouth. December? That's only 2 months away. I know it's soon, but think about it. We could honeymoon somewhere warm while Seoul is freezing. And my father's business associates keep asking when we're finally going to make it official. She leaned forward, her perfume enveloping him in a cloud of expensive flowers. Plus, I found the most amazing designer in Milan who could create something absolutely stunning if we give her enough time. Min-jun nodded and made appropriate responses, but his mind was elsewhere. 2 months, 8 weeks to figure out how to marry a woman he no longer loved, when the woman he did love was forbidden to him by every rule of decency and family loyalty. After dinner, he drove So Young back to her family's mansion in Pyeongchang-dong. The Park family home was a testament to old money and traditional values, all curved roof lines and carefully manicured gardens. As they pulled up the circular driveway, So-young turned to him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You've been quiet tonight. Are you feeling all right?" "Just tired," Minjun lied. "Work has been demanding." She studied his face in the dim light from the dashboard. "You know you can tell me anything, right? We're going to be married soon. There shouldn't be any secrets between us." The irony of her words wasn't lost on him. Their entire relationship was built on the kind of polite fiction that passed for intimacy in their social circle. They knew each other's favorite restaurants and vacation destinations, but Minjun couldn't tell you what So-young dreamed about at night, what made her laugh until she couldn't breathe, or what book had changed her life. He realized with startling clarity that he had never even tried to know those things about her. "Of course," he said, leaning over to kiss her cheek. "I'll call you tomorrow." As he drove home through the neon-lit streets of Seoul, Minjun couldn't shake the feeling that he was living someone else's life. The penthouse apartment that had once felt like a symbol of his success now seemed like a gilded cage. He stood on his balcony, looking out at the Han River snaking through the city, and found himself wondering what So-jin was doing at that moment. The answer came to him 2 days later when he found himself, seemingly by accident, in the neighborhood where the bookshop was located. He told himself he was just passing through on his way to a business meeting, but when he saw the warm light spilling out of the shop windows, he knew he had been lying to himself. So-jin was there, helping an elderly customer find a cookbook. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she was more beautiful than any woman had a right to be. When she looked up and saw him standing in the doorway, her face went through a series of emotions: surprise, pleasure, and then resignation. "I'll be right with you," she told him formally, as if he were just another customer. Minjun browsed the shelves while she finished with the elderly woman, pretending to be interested in a display of travel guides while actually watching So-jin's every movement. The way she listened so intently to the customer's story about wanting to cook her late husband's favorite dish. The way she knew exactly which cookbook would help and threw in a handwritten note with tips for the more difficult techniques. The genuine warmth in her voice as she wished the woman luck with her cooking adventure. When they were finally alone, So-jin approached him with her arms crossed, a defensive gesture that broke his heart a little. "This has to stop," she said without preamble. "What has to stop? I'm just a customer looking for books. Don't." Her voice was sharp. "Don't insult my intelligence. You don't just happen to be in this neighborhood, and you don't need another book. You need to go home to your fiancé and forget about whatever this is." Minjun set down the travel guide he had been pretending to read. "What if I can't?" "Then you need to try harder." So-jin's voice cracked slightly. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to me? Do you know how it feels to have someone look at you the way you're looking at me right now, knowing that it's impossible? Knowing that even if by some miracle you weren't engaged to my sister, we still couldn't be together because our families would never accept it, because your world and mine don't mix, because you're scared," Minjun interrupted gently. So Jin's eyes flashed. "Of course I'm scared. I'm terrified. But that doesn't make any of this okay." Minjun stepped closer, and she didn't back away. "What if we just talked? As friends? I promise I won't." "You can't promise me anything." "So," Jin said, but her voice was softer now. "That's the problem. You can't promise me that you'll figure out how to stop wanting something you can't have. You can't promise me that I'll stop feeling like my heart is going to explode every time I see you. And you definitely can't promise me that this won't destroy everything: your relationship with So-young, my relationship with my family, both of our futures." She was right, and Minjun knew it. But standing there in the warm light of the bookshop, surrounded by thousands of stories about impossible love and people who defied the odds, he couldn't bring himself to care about the logical arguments. "One coffee," he said. "One conversation. Then, if you tell me to stay away, I will." So, Jin stared at him for a long moment, and Minjun could practically see her internal struggle playing out across her face. Finally, she sighed. "There's a small cafe 2 blocks from here. Cafe Luna. I sometimes go there after work to grade papers and read." She glanced at the clock on the wall. I close the shop in an hour. Minjun felt something tight in his chest loosen for the first time in days. I'll be there. Cafe Luna turned out to be exactly the kind of place Minjun had never been to but immediately loved. Small and cluttered, with mismatched furniture, and the kind of coffee that came from someone's genuine passion rather than a corporate formula. Sojin was already there when he arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a stack of papers and a cup of tea that had probably gone cold while she worked. She looked up when he approached, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, she gestured to the seat across from her. "I almost didn't come," she admitted as he sat down. "But you did." "But I did." She set down her pen and really looked at him for the first time since that day in the bookshop. "I keep trying to convince myself that this is just, I don't know, some kind of romantic fantasy. That I'm projecting something onto you because you're handsome and rich and engaged to my sister, which makes you automatically forbidden and therefore more appealing." Minjun ordered coffee from the teenage barista who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "And? What conclusion did you come to?" "Then I'm probably right, but it doesn't seem to matter." "So," Jin's laugh was hollow. "I've spent the last 3 days trying to analyze my feelings like one of the novels I study, looking for themes and metaphors and deeper meanings. But sometimes attraction is just chemistry. Inexplicable and inconvenient and completely immune to logical analysis. Tell me about yourself," Minjun said suddenly. "Not the things I could find out by asking so young or looking you up online. Tell me something real." "So," Jin hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "I wanted to be a writer when I was little. I used to fill notebooks with stories about ordinary people who found magic in everyday things. My parents thought it was a waste of time. They wanted me to study business or law, something practical that would reflect well on the family. So Young was already the perfect daughter, beautiful and poised and engaged to exactly the right kind of man. They didn't need 2 perfect daughters, but they also couldn't have one daughter who was a complete disappointment. So you chose literature as a compromise. Academic literature felt respectable enough to satisfy them, while still letting me spend my days surrounded by stories." She traced patterns on the table with her finger. "But sometimes I still write. Little things, mostly. Character sketches, descriptions of moments that catch my attention. I have this theory that everyone has at least one story in them that's worth telling. But most people never realize what it is." Minjun found himself leaning forward, drawn in by her words in a way that had nothing to do with physical attraction. "What's your story?" "I don't know yet. I thought I did, but..." She looked at him directly, and the honesty in her eyes took his breath away. "I'm starting to think maybe I was wrong about what kind of story I was living." They talked for 3 hours, about books and dreams and the weight of family expectations, about the loneliness that could exist even in a crowded room, and the way Seoul could feel like the biggest city in the world and the smallest village simultaneously, depending on your state of mind. Minjun told her about the pressure of being the heir to a business empire he had never chosen, and how sometimes he felt like he was playing a character in someone else's script. Sojin talked about the guilt of wanting things that didn't fit into her carefully planned life, and the fear that she would never be brave enough to reach for them. When the cafe began closing around them, they realized they had been talking as if they had known each other for years instead of days. The easiness between them should have been comforting, but instead it made everything more complicated. "This is dangerous," Sojin said as they walked slowly toward the subway station. "I know. We can't do this again." "I know. But you're going to ask me to anyway." Minjun stopped walking and turned to face her under a streetlight that cast everything in gold and shadow. "I'm going to ask you to anyway." "So?" Jin closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were bright, with unshed tears. "This is going to end badly for everyone involved. Probably. So Young is going to be devastated. Yes, your families will be furious, without question. And we'll probably end up hating each other for ruining everything." Minjun reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek. She leaned into his palm for just a moment before stepping back. "Maybe," he said, Or maybe we'll end up saving each other from lives we never really wanted. So, Jin shook her head, but she was smiling through her tears. You're asking me to bet everything on a maybe. I'm asking you to give us a chance to find out what this is before we let other people's expectations destroy it. One more coffee, she said finally. But that's all, just one more. Min-jun knew she was lying to herself. They both were, but he nodded anyway. Just one more. But one coffee became two, then three. Then a week of stolen afternoons in small cafes and bookshops across Seoul. Places where neither of them would run into anyone from their usual circles. They were careful never to touch, never to let their conversations drift into territory that would make their relationship undeniably inappropriate. But the emotional intimacy growing between them was more dangerous than any physical contact could have been. Min-jun found himself living for those moments when Sojin would laugh at something he said. Really laugh, with her whole body involved in the joy of it. He memorized the way she talked with her hands when she got excited about a book, the way she listened to him with complete attention, as if his thoughts and opinions actually mattered to her as a person rather than as a business connection or social advantage. Sojin, for her part, discovered that the intimidating heir to Hansung Group was actually thoughtful and funny and surprisingly humble. She learned that he read voraciously but never mentioned it because his father considered it a waste of time that could be better spent on business development. She learned that he had wanted to study architecture in college but had been directed toward business administration instead. Most surprisingly, she learned that he remembered every detail of their conversations, asking follow-up questions about papers she was grading or books she had mentioned wanting to read. It was Sojin who finally acknowledged what they were both trying not to see. We're having an emotional affair, she said one afternoon as they sat in yet another anonymous cafe, this one in Itaewon where the international crowd provided perfect camouflage. Min-jun's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. That's a very clinical way to put it. It's an accurate way to put it. We're sharing intimacies that you should be sharing with your fiancé. We're seeking emotional connection and comfort from each other instead of from the people we're supposed to be committed to. The fact that we haven't kissed doesn't make it less of a betrayal. The word kissed hung in the air between them, loaded with all the tension they had been trying to ignore. Min-jun set down his cup carefully. Do you want to stop? He asked. Yes. So, Jin said immediately. Then more quietly, Number I don't know. I should want to stop, but I don't. I look forward to seeing you more than anything else in my week. I think about our conversations when I'm trying to fall asleep at night. I catch myself wondering what you would think about random things I see or read, wanting to tell you about them. She looked at him with something close to desperation. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen. Min-jun leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. For what it's worth, I'm in the same situation. I had dinner with So Young last night, and the entire time I was thinking about how I would rather be talking to you about the book you recommended. She was telling me about some charity event she's organizing, and instead of listening, I was wondering what you were doing, whether you were grading papers or reading or just thinking. We have to stop. So, Jin said, but there was no conviction in her voice. We should stop, Min-jun agreed, but I don't think I can. Not unless you can look me in the eye and tell me you don't feel what I feel when we're together. So, Jin stared at him for a long moment, and Min-jun could see the internal war being fought behind her eyes. Finally, she looked away. I can't tell you that. Then what do we do? I don't know. Her voice was barely above a whisper. In all the novels I've read, the star-crossed lovers either find a way to be together or they're destroyed by the attempt. But those are stories. This is real life, and real life doesn't usually have happy endings for people who fall in love with the wrong person. Maybe we're not falling in love with the wrong person, Min-jun said carefully. Maybe we're realizing we were with the wrong person all along. So, Jin's head snapped up, her eyes wide. Don't say that. You can't say that. Why not, if it's true? Because if it's true, then everything is. She gestured helplessly. Everything is ruined. Your engagement, my relationship with my family, both of our futures. You can't just decide you're in love with someone else 2 months before your wedding and expect there not to be consequences. What if the consequences are worth it? What if they're not? So, Jin's voice rose slightly, causing other cafe patrons to glance their way. She lowered it again immediately. What if we destroy everything for this? And then 6 months from now we realize it was just, I don't know, rebellion against our circumstances? What if we're not actually compatible long term? What if the only reason this feels so intense is because it's forbidden? Minjun had asked himself the same questions, late at night when he couldn't sleep, staring at the ceiling of his penthouse and trying to make sense of what was happening to him. But every time he tried to convince himself that what he felt for Sojin was just an illusion, he would remember the way she looked when she talked about something she was passionate about, or the way she listened to him as if his words actually mattered, and he knew it was real. "There's only one way to find out," he said, "which is, we stop pretending this is just friendship. We stop lying to ourselves about what we want." He leaned forward, his voice intense. "We figure out what we're really willing to risk for this." So, Jin was quiet for a long time, staring into her untouched tea. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but sad. "If we do this, if we really do this, there's no going back. You can't marry my sister after having an affair with me, emotional or otherwise. I can't face my family at holidays knowing I helped destroy. So, Young's engagement, we would be choosing each other over everyone and everything else in our lives. I know. And if it doesn't work out, then we'll have made the biggest mistake of our lives." Minjun finished. "But if we don't try, we might spend the rest of our lives wondering what if." So, Jin looked at him then, really looked at him, and Minjun felt as if she could see straight into his soul. Whatever she saw there seemed to give her the answer she was looking for. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to think about this without you sitting across from me making it impossible to think clearly." Minjun nodded, though every instinct told him to push, to make her decide right now while the moment was between them. "How much time?" "I don't know, a few days? A week?" She gathered her things, moving with sudden urgency as if staying even a moment longer would undo her resolve. "Don't come to the bookshop. Don't call me. Just let me figure out what I'm willing to lose for this." She stood to leave, then turned back one more time. "Minjun, whatever I decide, know that these past few weeks they've been the happiest I've ever been. Even with all the guilt and confusion and fear, getting to know you has been worth it." Then she was gone, leaving Minjun alone with his coffee and the weight of a decision that would change everything, no matter what they chose. The next week was the longest of Minjun's life. He threw himself into work with an intensity that had his assistants walking on eggshells and his business partners wondering if he was having some kind of breakdown. He attended 3 board meetings, closed 2 major deals, and reviewed enough contracts to paper his office wall. But none of it provided the distraction he desperately needed. So Young called every day, chattering about wedding preparations and honeymoon destinations, and each conversation felt like another weight added to his chest. She was excited about the December wedding date, had already put deposits down on flowers and photographers, and a dress that cost more than most people's cars. She talked about their future with such confidence, such certainty that they were perfect for each other, that Minjun wondered if he was losing his mind. Maybe Sojin was right. Maybe what he felt for her was just some kind of psychological rebellion against his predetermined life. Maybe he was sabotaging a perfectly good relationship because he was afraid of commitment, or because some part of him couldn't accept happiness when it came in the expected package. But then he would remember the way Jin's eyes lit up when she talked about a book she loved, or the way she had looked at him in that cafe as if he was the most fascinating person she had ever met. And he knew he wasn't imagining it. What they had was real, even if it was impossible. On Friday evening, exactly 1 week after their last conversation, Jun's phone rang. So, Jin's name appeared on the screen, and his heart nearly stopped. "I've made my decision," she said without preamble. Minjun closed his eyes, gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles went white. "And? I can't do it." Her voice was steady, but he could hear the tears she was trying not to shed. "I'm sorry, Minjun, but I can't be the person who destroys my sister's happiness. I can't be the reason your family disowns you. I can't." I can't be responsible for that much damage, even for this. The words hit him like a physical blow. He had known this was a possibility, the logical possibility, the smart choice. But somehow he had convinced himself that what they felt for each other would be stronger than their obligations. So, Jin, please don't make this harder than it already is, she whispered. Please, just let me do the right thing. The right thing for who? For everyone. For So Young, for your families, for you. You'll thank me someday, when you're happily married and this just feels like a moment of temporary insanity. Minjun wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that she was wrong, that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. But the pain in her voice stopped him. She had clearly agonized over this decision, and arguing with her now would only make it crueler. If this is what you want, he said finally. It's not what I want, So Jin said, and now she was definitely crying. It's what has to happen. Goodbye, Minjun. She hung up before he could respond, leaving him alone in his penthouse, with the city lights blurring through his sudden tears. He had lost her before he ever really had her, and the grief was surprisingly acute. Minjun tried to move on. He threw himself back into his relationship with So Young, making an effort to be present and engaged in their wedding planning. He attended dress fittings and cake tastings and meetings with florists, playing the role of excited groom while feeling like a fraud. So Young seemed to notice his renewed attention and responded with even more enthusiasm, talking constantly about their future and how perfect everything was going to be. 2 weeks before the wedding, So Young's family hosted an engagement party at their mansion. All of Seoul's social elite were there, along with both extended families and a selection of business associates. Minjun wore his most expensive suit and his most charming smile, accepting congratulations and toasts while feeling increasingly disconnected from his own life. He was standing on the terrace, taking a break from the overwhelming attention, when he saw her. Sojin stood at the edge of the garden, partially hidden by a large flowering bush, wearing a simple black dress that made her look elegant and heartbreaking at the same time. She was watching the party through the French doors, her expression unreadable from a distance. Jun's first instinct was to go to her, but he forced himself to stay put. She had made her choice, and he had to respect it. But as he watched, she turned and looked directly at him, as if she had sensed his gaze. Even across the garden, even in the dim light from the paper lanterns, he could see the longing in her face. They stared at each other for a long moment, and Minjun felt all the emotions he had been trying to suppress come rushing back. Then Sojin shook her head slightly, a tiny gesture that somehow conveyed both regret and resolve, and disappeared into the darkness beyond the garden. Minjun spent the rest of the evening distracted, going through the motions of celebration while his mind was entirely elsewhere. So Young seemed to sense his mood and kept shooting him concerned glances, but the presence of so many guests prevented her from asking what was wrong. It wasn't until later that night, after all the guests had gone home and So Young had retired to her room, that Mrs. Park approached him in the family's elegant sitting room. She told me, "So," Young's mother said without preamble. Jun's blood turned to ice. "I'm sorry?" "So, Jin, she told me about your friendship." Mrs. Park's voice was carefully controlled, but Minjun could see the anger simmering beneath her composed exterior. "She came to me 3 weeks ago, very upset, and confessed that she had developed inappropriate feelings for her sister's fiancé." Minjun felt the world shifting around him. "Mrs. Park, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain. Sojin told me everything. How you met, how you began spending time together, how you both realized that your feelings had moved beyond what was appropriate." She studied his face with shrewd eyes. "What I want to know is what you intend to do about it." The question caught Minjun off guard. He had expected anger, accusations, demands that he stay away from Sojin. He hadn't expected this calm inquiry into his intentions. "I don't understand." "It's a simple question, Mr. Lee. My younger daughter is in love with you. My older daughter is planning to marry you in 2 weeks. One of them is going to end up heartbroken, and as their mother, I would prefer to minimize the damage." "Mrs. Park sat down across from him, her posture perfect despite the late hour. "So I'm asking you directly, which daughter do you want to marry?" Minjun stared at her, wondering if he had fallen into some kind of alternate reality. "You're asking me to choose between your daughters? I'm asking you to be honest about what you want before you make a choice that destroys multiple lives." Mrs. Park's voice was sharp now. "So, Young loves you, but she loves the idea of you just as much as she loves the person. You represent everything she was raised to want: status, security, the approval of our families and social circle. If you married her and then spent your life longing for her sister, you would both be miserable. And Sojin? Sojin loves you for who you are, not what you represent. She sees past your family name and your money to the person underneath. But she's also terrified of hurting her sister and disappointing her family." Mrs. Park leaned forward slightly. "She's been miserable for weeks, Mr. Lee. She barely eats. She can't concentrate on her studies. And she's been avoiding family dinners because she can't bear to hear So Young talk about wedding plans." Minjun felt his heart breaking all over again. "She asked me to stay away. She said it was the right thing to do. My daughter has always been too noble for her own good. She would sacrifice her own happiness to protect everyone else's, even when everyone else would be better served by the truth." Mrs. Park stood up, smoothing her elegant dress. "I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. So Young isn't as fragile as everyone believes. She's been raised to be resilient, to adapt to changing circumstances with grace. If you told her tomorrow that you had fallen in love with someone else, she would be hurt, yes, but she would survive. She might even be relieved." "Relieved? She's been having doubts too, Mr. Lee. Oh, she hides it well, but a mother notices these things. She's been trying so hard to be the perfect fiancée that she's forgotten to check whether she actually wants to be your wife." Mrs. Park moved toward the doorway, then paused. "The question is whether you're brave enough to fight for what you really want, or whether you're going to let fear and social expectations trap you in a life that makes no one truly happy." She left him alone with his thoughts, and a decision that suddenly seemed less impossible than it had an hour ago. Minjun didn't sleep that night. He walked the halls of his penthouse, stood on his balcony watching the sun rise over Seoul, and tried to imagine two different futures. In one, he married So Young as planned, became the dutiful husband everyone expected him to be, and spent the rest of his life wondering what might have been. In the other, he risked everything for a love that might not survive the chaos it would create. By morning, he knew what he had to do. He called So Young first, asking her to meet him at their favorite restaurant for lunch. Neutral ground where they could talk privately without the pressure of family watching. She arrived looking radiant, chattering about final wedding preparations and how excited she was that they would be married in less than 2 weeks. "So Young," Minjun said when she finally paused for breath, "we need to talk." Something in his tone must have warned her, because her bright smile faltered. "That sounds serious." "It is." Minjun reached across the table and took her hands, noting absently that her manicure was perfect as always. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to everything before you respond." Over the next 20 minutes, Minjun told her everything. About meeting Sojin in the bookshop, about the immediate connection he had felt, about the weeks of conversations and the growing realization that he had fallen in love with her sister. He was honest about his confusion, his guilt, and his certainty that he couldn't marry So Young while feeling the way he did about someone else. To her credit, So Young listened without interruption, her face cycling through surprise, hurt, anger, and finally something that looked almost like relief. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time, staring down at their joined hands. "I should be furious with you," she said finally. "You have every right to be. I should be devastated, humiliated, heartbroken." She looked up at him, and her eyes were bright with tears, but her voice was steady. "And I am hurt. I am. But I'm also—" She paused, searching for the right words. "I'm also not as surprised as I should be." Minjun frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've felt it too. The distance between us, the way you've seemed distracted lately. I told myself it was pre-wedding nerves, but part of me knew it was something more. So Young pulled her hands free and reached for her water glass, buying herself time to compose her thoughts. Can I tell you something? And promise you won't think less of me for it? Of course. Sometimes I've wondered if we were together because we were supposed to be, not because we actually chose each other. We fit together so perfectly on paper. Our families, our backgrounds, our social status. Everyone always said we were the perfect couple, and I think we both started believing it without really examining whether it was true. Minjun stared at her, amazed by her honesty. So Young, I'm not saying I don't care about you, because I do. I love you, Minjun, but I think I love the idea of us more than I love the reality of us. Does that make sense? She smiled sadly. We've never fought about anything meaningful, never challenged each other, never even had a conversation as honest as this one. We've been playing the roles of the perfect couple without ever figuring out if we actually like each other as people. I like you, Minjun said automatically, then stopped. I mean, I do, but you're right. I don't think I know you well enough to love you the way you deserve to be loved. And I don't think I know you well enough either. So, Young wiped away a tear that had escaped despite her composure. The man I thought I was marrying would never have fallen in love with my sister. He would have been too controlled, too concerned with appearances. But the man sitting across from me right now, the one who's been honest enough to tell me the truth, even though it would have been easier to lie, I think I like him better. They sat in silence for a moment, both processing the end of their engagement and the strange relief that came with admitting they had never been right for each other. What happens now? So Young asked. I don't know. I have to cancel a wedding, face both our families, figure out how to tell Sojin that I chose her without knowing if she'll choose me back. Minjun ran a hand through his hair. Your mother is going to kill me. Actually, she might surprise you. Mother has always been more practical than romantic. She'd rather have both her daughters happy than maintain a marriage that was doomed from the start. So, Young gathered her purse, preparing to leave. But you should know, if you hurt Sojin, if you break her heart after everything she sacrificed for this decision, I will make your life very difficult. I wouldn't expect anything less. So, Young stood, then leaned down to kiss his cheek one last time. For what it's worth, I hope it works out. Sojin deserves someone who looks at her the way you do when you say her name. After she left, Minjun sat alone in the restaurant, feeling simultaneously relieved and terrified. He had burned the bridge back to his old life, but he still didn't know if Sojin would meet him on the other side. Finding Sojin took longer than expected. She wasn't at the bookshop, and when Minjun went to her apartment building, the elderly woman who managed the front desk told him she hadn't seen her in days. Finally, on a hunch, he went to the university library where she had mentioned doing research. He found her in the literature section, surrounded by stacks of books and papers, looking like she hadn't slept in days. When she saw him approaching, her face went pale. Minjun, what are you doing here? Someone might see us. I broke up with So Young. So, Jin's pen slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the table. You what? I broke up with So Young. I told her everything. About us. About how I feel. About why I can't marry her. Minjun sat down across from her, ignoring the curious glances from other students. The wedding is off. Oh my God. So Jin buried her face in her hands. Oh my God, Minjun. What have you done? I chose you. I chose us. But I told you. You told me you couldn't be the person who destroyed your sister's happiness. Well, now you're not. I'm the one who ended the engagement. I'm the one who will deal with the consequences. Minjun reached across the table and gently pulled her hands away from her face. So Young knows about us. Your mother knows about us. And they both think we should be together. So Jin stared at him as if he had grown a second head. My mother thinks we should be together? She thinks So Young and I were wrong for each other, and that you and I might actually be right. She's worried about you, So Jin. She says you've been miserable. I have been miserable, So Jin whispered. I've been completely miserable. But that doesn't mean, just because you ended your engagement doesn't mean we can automatically. Can't we? Minjun's voice was soft but intense. What's stopping us now? Your sister is handling this better than either of us expected. Your mother is on our side. My family will be furious for a while, but they'll get over it eventually. The social consequences will be uncomfortable, but not insurmountable. So, Jin looked around the library, as if seeing it for the first time. People will talk. They'll say I seduced you away from my sister, that I'm a homewrecker. People will talk no matter what we do. The question is whether we're going to let their opinions determine how we live our lives. And if this doesn't work out, if we try this and realize we were wrong about each other, Minjun leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers, then at least we'll know. At least we'll have tried instead of spending the rest of our lives wondering what if. So, Jin was quiet for a long time, staring down at her hands. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright with tears, but there was something else there too. Hope. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. This is going to be complicated. Probably. Everyone's going to have opinions about what we should do. Definitely. And we might be making the biggest mistake of our lives. We might be, Minjun agreed. Or we might be making the best decision we've ever made. So, Jin smiled through her tears. You really ended your engagement for me? I ended my engagement because I realized I was in love with you. And marrying someone else while feeling this way would have been unfair to everyone involved. Minjun stood and walked around the table to her side. But yes, I chose you. I will always choose you. When Sojin stood to meet him, when she let him take her hands and pull her close, when she looked up at him with love and trust and residual fear all mixed together in her expression, Minjun knew they were going to be okay. Not because it would be easy, it wouldn't be, but because they had finally stopped running from what they felt for each other. So what happens now? Sojin asked. Now we figure it out as we go. We deal with our families. We face whatever social consequences come our way, and we see if this thing between us is strong enough to survive in the real world. And if people say we're crazy, then we'll be crazy together. So, Jin laughed, the sound bright and joyful in the quiet library. I can't believe you did this. I can't believe you actually chose me. I told you I would, Minjun said, leaning down to rest his forehead against hers. I told you I would always choose you. The autumn rain had stopped, and Seoul stretched out beyond the library windows, full of possibility and promise. Minjun and Sojin stood together among the books and papers, surrounded by thousands of stories about love and loss, and the courage it took to reach for happiness even when it seemed impossible. They had a long road ahead of them, conversations with family members, explanations to friends, the delicate work of building a relationship in the aftermath of the chaos they had created. But for the first time in weeks, Minjun felt like he could breathe freely. He had stopped pretending to want a life that was wrong for him, and he had found someone who saw him clearly and loved him anyway. 6 months later, Minjun and Sojin were married in a small ceremony in the same neighborhood where they had first met. So Young was there, radiant in her role as maid of honor, having found her own happiness with someone who loved her for herself rather than what she represented. The Park and Lee families had eventually come around, recognizing that sometimes the heart chooses paths that logic cannot predict or control. As Minjun watched his new wife laugh at something her sister whispered to her during the reception, he thought about all the novels Sojin had told him about, stories of impossible love that either ended in tragedy or triumph, depending on the courage of the characters involved. Their story was still being written, but Minjun was confident about the ending. They had chosen each other despite every obstacle, every social expectation, every rational argument against their love. And in choosing each other, they had discovered that sometimes the most impossible thing is also the most necessary, the thing that makes all the risk and uncertainty worthwhile. The bookshop where they first met still displayed a small handwritten sign in the window. Every story has the potential to change a life. Minjun smiled every time he passed it, knowing exactly how true those words could be.